KAMILA DYDYNA, thank you so much for coming on to talk police from your home in Dublin, Ireland. Now, you're an actor, writer, and filmmaker based in Dublin, although you're originally from Poland, and we're going to be talking today about your film project, Debutante, which is a short drama focusing on some of the dangerous aspects of the Jehovah's Witness religion. Now, you grew up Jehovah's Witness, at least from the age of 10 when your mother joined, and became quite zealous within the religion until doubts caused you to leave. But before we go into that, could you just briefly describe in your own words the JW religion for anyone who doesn't know much about it?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, by the way. So Jehovah's Witness religion is basically a Christian religion that was more or less started in the late 19th century by Charles Taze Russell, and it evolved, over time into this group of people that counts about 8.5 million members at the moment, and they are present in pretty much everywhere around the world, and they focus their belief on the fact that there's going to be Armageddon that's going to destroy the entire the whole world, and pretty much everybody who isn't a Jehovah's Witness is going to die in a very ugly and apocalyptic way. They spend their entire energy and time as much as they can to further the cause or further the religion by preaching to other people and attempting to convert them to become Jehovah's Witnesses, and their own free time they spend meeting in their congregations and praying and studying the Bible, or the many publications that are issued by that organization. So it's very much a closed type of religion, if you know what I mean. They're very wary of anyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. So if you do become a Jehovah's Witness, you pretty much agree to cut yourself off from the world and other people as much as you only can, and just stay within the bubble of everything to do with Jehovah's Witnesses.
Right. Let's hear about those zealous years you spent as a witness. I assume that meant going door to door, getting baptized, all the usual JW things?
Indeed, I got baptized when I was 13, and at the time, and I guess I still think that it was my decision. I wasn't pressured into doing it. I just had a very deep desire to become a Jehovah's Witness, and although when you think about it, I was 13, so anyway. But yeah, so for a number of years, so my life, proceeded in a standard way, in the sense of, I did go to school. I went to primary school and then secondary school, and then I even went to university. But other than that, and, the interactions with people in schools, I was pretty much entirely focused on being a Jehovah's Witness and making sure that I was as exemplary as I possibly could be. So what that meant is I was very engaged in the activities of the congregation. When I would come to a meeting, and at the time when I was a witness, the meetings took place 3 times a week. So, very regular schedule that you maintain. And you have to prepare for the meetings and study the material in advance, which obviously takes time. And then you're at the meeting, and I would have been very engaged. I would have participated in discussions. And when I say participated in discussions, they weren't real discussions. It wasn't like an open-minded discussion about a fragment of the Bible where people say, well, I wonder, could this mean that? Or, I wonder what that meant, or I wonder how to understand it. None of that. It's not really a discussion. It's really more like rehashing what's already been printed in publications issued by Jehovah's Witnesses, if you know what I mean. So
I see.
It's more like you're absolutely not allowed.
Really.
You're not allowed to express any doubts or, God forbid, any disagreement with what's written in the Watchtower or Awake or any of the books that Jehovah's Witnesses issue. Do you know what I mean? So in that sense, there are discussions. They're just like being filled with propaganda, and you're obliged to agree with the propaganda and enthusiastically say that you love it. But at the time, like, you know, when I think about it now, it's like crazy. But at the time, I did it, and it was the right thing to do, and it didn't raise any, you know, red flags in my mind. Although I do remember I had very good friends in secondary school who weren't Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were contributing to me getting some cognitive dissonance for the first time. They were very
that's the way it happens.
I know. They were fiercely intelligent girls and fun and creative and wonderful. And one of them said they knew I was Jehovah's Witness, but I think I had a better sense not to try to preach to them, because I just loved them, and we had a great time together. So I didn't quite want to impose my religion on that, even though I should have if I really wanted to be an exemplary witness. But anyway, one of them once said to me, "Kamila, isn't like those articles in the Watchtower, aren't they like stupid? It says things like the farmer went to the shop, and then there's a question, where did the farmer go?" I was so offended. I was like, "Oh, you don't understand. That's not what it's like." I was really upset and just like, embarrassed, because deep in my heart, I knew she was right to an extent, without being offensive. Jehovah's Witnesses are fiercely intelligent people as well, some of them. And, and I'm not saying that they're stupid or anything, but a lot of those publications that we studied, where you have a paragraph, there's an article to study, a Watchtower study. There are paragraphs and there are questions for each paragraph. And most of the time, it's really it's almost like mind-blowingly or kind of mind-numbingly repetitive and basic, and indeed questions like what I mean, like questions that don't make you think in any way, questions that don't engage your mind at all. None of that happened. It was just the
propaganda, like you said before.
Exactly. I remember, that's probably awful thing to say, but that's how it felt. Is it the geese or the turkey? I think it's the geese in France that are force-fed for this pâté called foie gras.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of how it felt, although you didn't quite notice how uncomfortable that was, at the time.
Wow.
So, yeah, and it went on like that for, I think up until I was maybe 20 or 21 when I went to university. And when I did go to university, not because of the things I studied there, but because of other aspects. Basically, my father, who died many years ago, was an alcoholic. So my childhood was a bit kind of tough in some ways because of that. But I never faced it, and I never dealt with it, and I never even acknowledged that I had right to have some sort of issues, with emotional issues with that. Because as a Jehovah's Witness, you are expected to be happy. They actually say things like, Jehovah's Witnesses are the happiest people in the world. And you'd better be happy or else. If you're not happy, that means there's something wrong with you, that you're bringing reproach on Jehovah's name. And like, get a grip, be happy. So what happened was, when I left home, and I was removed from my kind of routine with my family, and this kind of, it was like a certain system that held me up like a rag doll, and I was like functioning. When I was on my own, it was like those strings were cut, and I collapsed. In a new city on my own, where I didn't pretty much know anybody when I was studying.
Now, unusually for a JW, you went to university, but stayed loyal to your church and its beliefs. But you had some health issues, and that started setting a lot of things into motion, didn't it?
It did indeed. Like I mentioned just earlier there, when I did go to university, it kind of removed me from my routine at home, and it kind of felt like I was flung into an unknown space, and it was as if, you know, a number of kind of unresolved emotional issues from my childhood with my dad, who was an alcoholic, and I think growing cognitive dissonance as well at that stage. It was like they caught up with me, because I was, you know, in a new city on my own where I didn't really know anyone, and I became really, really depressed and very much kind of struggling with anxiety as well and stuff like that. And my initial reaction to that was increasing my level of activity as a Jehovah's Witness, because pretty much whenever you have a health issue that is like a mental health issue or emotional health issue, if you will, as a Jehovah's Witness, you're not encouraged at all to seek external help, because psychologists and psychiatrists are not to be trusted, because they'll tell you things that aren't corresponding to what we say in the publications of Jehovah's Witnesses. Do you know what I mean? And they can like
not approved. Yeah,
exactly. So in that sense, you're encouraged to, you know, pray more and preach more, and that'll help you get better, literally. Obviously, I don't think they actually publish that in the publications anymore as much as they did when I was a witness. You know, times have changed, but they will certainly say it to you even these days. You know, that if you have mental health issues, you should just, you know, focus on your relationship with Jehovah, and if you preach more, you'll just feel better and stuff like that. So that's what I did for about a year, I think, maybe a year and a half. I can't remember quite exactly, but I just became incredibly manically engaged as a Jehovah's Witness in preaching, in reading the Bible, studying the publications, and I was like a poster child for a young Jehovah's Witness, you know, which came with a certain status in the congregation, the new congregation where I studied in that city. And initially, you know, I was a star, I was loved, I was appreciated and very welcome, and it was amazing. And it kind of culminated in me being invited to be interviewed at an assembly, which is a very, very big meeting of Jehovah's Witnesses that they do, I think, twice a year, which is a huge kind of recognition of your efforts. It's a privilege to be interviewed like that. And I remember feeling amazing about it and feeling really special. And I was talking about how I nearly indoctrinated a girl that I was sharing the room at university with, my tenant or co-tenant. You know, it was a twin room. Wow. And that was, that was a thing to be proud of. Thank goodness, I'm pretty sure she didn't become a Jehovah's Witness. So, but anyway, so what happened was, after about a year of this kind of manic activity, I burnt out completely. And from one day to another, I just became a shadow of myself. I pretty much stopped all this manic activity because I just couldn't, it was like hitting a wall. I couldn't make another step. And I became visibly, openly depressed. And what happened in that time was that all those people in the new congregation, and to an extent in my home congregation when I was visiting home as well, they just turned away from me because I stopped being this, stellar Jehovah's Witness. They refer to it as spiritually uplifting company. It's not good enough to just be a Jehovah's Witness to be deserving their friendship. You better be a really dedicated Jehovah's Witness, if you know what I mean. If you're weak, if you're doubting, God forbid, if you're expressing your doubts, you're no longer good company. So what I experienced then was basically a complete kind of isolation and feeling very, very alone. And I didn't quite understand that I was preemptively shunned as when I was speaking to Lloyd Evans, he used that expression, and
That's right,
it really, I caught on. And indeed, that's what it was. It was preemptive shunning. So initially, that just made me feel more guilty, and I wanted to, step up my game to be deserving of their love again. But gradually, I started seeing a psychologist because I just couldn't cope. And gradually over time, like I saw one psychologist and then another for years. I needed a lot of therapy, as it turned out. But this, alongside with my just general kind of realization that it's not fair that I was just kind of abandoned like that by people that I considered my friends, it was like my emotions became my guide in leaving the religion, because they started, I started feeling angry and disappointed, and it's that story, Jack and the Beanstalk. It was like it flourished from this kind of tiny nugget of anger into this huge wave, this avalanche of rage that I started feeling at having been manipulated, I felt guilty all the time, literally 24/7 as a Jehovah's Witness, that I wasn't good enough, that I should preach more, that I should study more, that I should pray more, blah, blah, blah. And it was exhausting.
I bet. That would mess anyone up, really.
Yeah. So, like it was a very long and complex process, but basically, I guess I should be grateful, or, I kind of feel lucky that I did get that depression when I did, because it really was a wake-up call. And gradually over a number of years, it caused me to eventually wake up and decide, actually, this isn't for me. But it was so slow, like when water shapes rocks, the slow process of erosion. That's how slow it was for me to actually wake up. That's how it felt anyway,
Okay.
Yeah, well, what I would add to it is that when I actually decided that I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore, that was the most terrified I've ever been in my life, because being a Jehovah's Witness was like something that was coded in my DNA. It was everything I was. I didn't exist as me, as a person, as an entity outside of being a Jehovah's Witness. So shedding that, I had like gruesome images in my head. I'm very visual. It literally was like something from a sci-fi gory B-class movie where people get like torn in half.
Wow.
That's how it felt. It was really painful, terribly terrifying. And I remember just feeling completely lost. Like I didn't know anything about anything at all. It's a bit like, I was thinking about it recently, when a child gets born, when the time comes to be born, right, labor, I don't quite know, I obviously don't remember, but I imagine what it's like is you start feeling this unstoppable pressure to go, and there's only one direction to go, and it's terrifying, and you have no idea what's on the other side, and it's so scary, but you can't help it. You have to go. So that's how unstoppable it felt, once I really started doubting and seeing that this religion isn't working for me, and I don't think they're the true religion. And by the way, I don't think I believe in God at all. All that felt like this mental pressure that was pushing me out of my identity as a Jehovah's Witness and out of the religion and the community. But the fear of it and this kind of being completely lost when you do come out as a child and you're born, there's a bunch of people waiting to mind you, whereas as an adult, when you go through this process kind of mentally, there isn't really anyone to mind you. You have to find new people and new friends who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses that will mind you, and it's it can be really hard. But
later on, you found yourself in Dublin on a new career path, And that led, of course, to you becoming a filmmaker. So can you tell us a little bit about how that all came about?
Sure. Well, most of my career it was kind of accidental. So when I did come to Dublin, it was kind of more or less the same year when I decided I didn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness anymore. And what this meant, it gave me all this freedom suddenly in a new country, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a plan or, any sort of a career path in mind. So my jobs were really accidental. My first job was Starbucks, just because I needed any job because I didn't have any money to, survive for longer than a few weeks. And then I ended up working accidentally again in an office. My desire to have a job, the specificity of it at the time was I wanted to work in an office. Not like, I wanted to be an accountant or a computer, whatever, IT person or, or teacher. None of that specificity. Just I wanted to work in an office.
And any office.
Exactly. And so, I did get a job, some sort of an administrative job in an office because one of my clients in Starbucks was looking for someone. So, I had like a string of jobs in customer service and then sales. It wasn't too hard to find jobs like that in Dublin because, I spoke a foreign language, as in Polish, and that's very handy in those bigger corporations. In my last job before I left for this kind of more arty lifestyle, if you will, was in LinkedIn, and I was there for 5 years. And I was doing really well in sales, of all things. Wonder why.
Well, yes. I mean, you basically, Jehovah's Witnesses are sort of, they're salesmen, aren't they?
I know. That's why I'm laughing. But in late 2014, I burnt out again because I guess I didn't really want to live a corporate life for. At that moment in time for the rest of my days, and I already had a desire to basically create art, specifically to do with film, but at the time I didn't know even that I wanted to write scripts or direct. It was all very vague and just, I've loved cinema since, for as long as I remember. Even when I was a kid, I was spending crazy amounts of time watching TV. So it was always something that I was drawn to. But when I left my corporate job, I already had a script written for my first short film, Testimony. And when I say a script written, I didn't have a clue about proper formatting of a script. So I just wrote it the way I thought it would be in my head. I kind of saw the film play out in my head and I wrote it down. When I think about it today, it's embarrassing how badly formatted it was. But it didn't matter, and I guess at the time. And I was able to shoot the film in, I think, January or February 2015. And I was really lucky, I guess, because the film was really well received on the festival circuit in Ireland and in the UK and other European countries, the States and even Australia. So that was very encouraging for me. And it was kind of the start of my involvement in this film world. And then a year later, I shot another short film. This time it was a 26-minute long LGBT drama and a bit of a thriller, I hope. And that film was, both of them were picked up by the Irish National TV broadcaster, which was great. And again, it had its own kind of festival circuit. So that was 2016. And after my second film, I was lucky again. People who I got to know through working on my films started recommending me for jobs in production, on commercials, on other short films, and documentaries. So I work initially as a production assistant, then as a production coordinator, and this year mostly as production manager on commercials, actually. So it's a nice kind of variety, if you know what I mean, for me to stay within the film industry or the media industry while I'm pursuing my own work as a filmmaker.
Now, you are working on a new film, Debutante. MEHTA has done a very nice review of the script and describes this as a very real story of how religious leaders can threaten people for the crime of being human. Now, without giving too much away, can you go into more detail about the story and what inspired it?
Sure. The lovely HEMANT MEHTA, he hasn't actually read the script. He based his write-up on what I described on the crowdfunding campaigns page for the film. God bless him, he's awesome. I said
God bless the friendly atheist, yes.
It's a hang up from, I don't know from where, but yeah. So Debutante is a short narrative drama, and it's a story about a loss of faith. It's a coming of age drama highlighting how damaging and dangerous it is to impose too much religious control onto a human being. And it also addresses just how devastating the practice of shunning is among Jehovah's Witnesses. So in a nutshell, it's a story of a teenager called Meg. It takes place in contemporary Dublin. And Meg is a very devout Jehovah's Witness, but she's also madly in love with her boyfriend from the same congregation. And even though both of them are very, very believing, they end up spending a night together. And the consequence of it is the experience of a judicial committee, which is a pseudo court hearing, if you will, where 3 elders of the congregation interrogate the girl in this case. And the film focuses on what that experience does to her faith, to her identity as a woman, and to her relationship with her boyfriend.
Shunning, for anyone who doesn't know, is when the rest of the congregation pretty much literally turns their back on you because they've discovered or heard that you've sinned in some way or something that they don't like.
Yes, it can be really extreme. Most of the time it is among Jehovah's Witnesses. It's basically a social death. One thing I do want to highlight, it's not a documentary, and it's not my personal story. It's a collage, if you will, or collective experience of some people I knew. And there is definitely some of me and my experiences in Meg's story, but it isn't my story per se, if you know what I mean.
Right. To be clear, the film isn't completed yet, but the script is ready to be shot. You're now concentrating on fundraising and promoting this project. Now, there is an Indiegogo fundraising campaign which ends on December 23rd, so not too far away. And people can contribute via the link either here or on the Indiegogo site. But that may remain active for longer depending on how much is raised. Isn't that right?
That is correct. So indeed, I'm pretty much ready to shoot the film, except I need money. My intention with the film is not to, just because I love watching good films, and I'm very particular when it comes to a cinematic look of a film and the fact that, you know, it sounds good, and it has, you know, a high kind of production quality. I want my film to deliver the same, and these things cost money, unfortunately. So I am and have been crowdfunding to cover the production costs for it. My target to raise is €20,000, which may seem like a lot, but in Dublin to shoot any film, €20,000 is it's literally like pocket change. It's really not a lot of money. So just getting this out of the way, I've raised, including, you can contribute through Indiegogo, but you can also contribute through PayPal. So between both of these kind of channels, if you will, I've raised about €7,400 at the moment, which is great. And I'm incredibly grateful. I think people from 22 countries, including Hong Kong and Singapore, contributed, which kind of blows my mind, and it's wonderful. But I still have, you know, something like $1,500 to raise in this very short space of time. So indeed, if you guys are watching it and if the subject resonates with you, it'd be great if you would consider chipping in. It may remain open if I reach the target of €20,000. Indiegogo campaigns go into something called in demand, and what this means, it's basically the campaign remains open and people can continue contributing, but it only happens if I reach the target of €20,000. But yeah, and one more thing I want to say is it's not intended to be a project addressed only to ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, not at all. I'm hoping that it'll be a quite relatable story of coming of age and loss of faith, and this kind of experience of first sexual relationship as well. All those things are highly relatable, and I definitely want to address that film to the general public, definitely not only Jehovah's Witnesses or ex-Jehovah's Witnesses.
So do contributors to the campaign get any perks? I mean, other than helping make this important film a reality?
Absolutely. I designed a number of kind of tiers, if you know what I mean. So for a contribution of €10, I offer access to the digital download of the film as soon as it's completed. So you get to see it before it gets ever released on TV or even on the festival circuit, but it's going to be your private copy. And then it goes on to, other tiers where you can, for example, get a signed copy of the script to know the whole story, or access to something like a blooper reel or, behind the scenes footage when we're shooting the film, so that I would share it with you as well exclusively. I also offer, especially for people who have the ability to come over to Dublin, set visits, premiere invitations, and it goes all the way to associate and executive producer credit if you guys are watching it and if you're into film or you're interested in developing your kind of production career. That's also an opportunity to step on board as an executive or associate producer and be part of the project.
Right. Okay, Kamila, thanks so much for your time and going into such fascinating detail about your life and this amazing project. It's a subject that's not really been tackled all that often in drama. There was last year's Apostasy, of course, but the more films about the dangers of cults and the emotional coercion within them, the better, wouldn't you say?
I completely agree. I loved Apostasy myself, and definitely I think there's a need for more films that show I suppose the damaging aspects of the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. One thing I would say though is my intention isn't inciting hatred or kind of scandal, Jehovah's Witnesses are terrible people. It's not what I'm after. I believe that sometimes you're more heard if you speak in a respectful and balanced way about an issue rather than screaming. Do you know what I mean? So one thing I do want to highlight actually is I think there are a lot of amazing people among Jehovah's Witnesses, and some of my former friends whom I deeply miss as well. And I would never go and say that Jehovah's Witnesses are universally bad or terrible people. They follow policies that are incredibly hurtful and damaging, and that's something I want to speak about.
Okay, I will put all relevant links to your work in the description below, and the Indiegogo campaign link will take you to the campaign page where anyone can contribute any amount, large or small. And I guess all that's left to say is best wishes with this project, Kamila, and thank you once again for coming on to Talk Beliefs.
Thank you so much. Huge pleasure to talk to you.